A workshop tonight before the council meeting, and with that, it's looking at the parking. So, Kara, if you want to kind of take over and introduce it, if you will.
Sure. So at the last couple of council meetings over the last month, we had some conversation about some lot grading issues, topsoil issues, and retaining wall type issues.
I'm sorry, I said parking, didn't I? Forget that. Listen to Kara. She knows what she's talking about. All right, go ahead.
I could try to work parking in somehow. But it's an issue that staff's been reviewing, so wanted to take an opportunity in a work session to provide some background to the council and then just provide the council with some information about some things staff is thinking about to get some feedback before we finalize any potential changes in processes and whatnot. There are three different topics we're going to cover today, specifically related to lot grading, plan review, and inspection. So grading of individual lots within a subdivision at the time of new home construction. Topsoil, or lack thereof, topsoil, is shown by this great picture here that clearly doesn't show the presence of any topsoil underneath that grass. And then also tree clearing that occurs on an individual lot basis. So after a new home is built, property owners, whether they come in and clear some trees that had been preserved or protected as part of a development process. So those are the three areas we're going to cover. We're going to go into detail about each of them, just outlining what has been historical practice and some of the information in our ordinance, and then lay out some things we're thinking about. So first, as it relates to lot grading, plan review, and inspection, so we are talking about grading that occurs on an individual lot basis. So when a new development comes in, the developer and the developer's engineer proposes grading of the whole subdivision. That plan is reviewed by the engineering department, the public works department, the community development department, and approved prior to them beginning the actual work to do the subdivision improvement. So put the roads in. As part of that process, though, they mass grade all the lots. So that's when you see all the trees get cleared and the big grader come in and move dirt around. And they get the grading complete to a particular point where the lots would be essentially ready for a builder to come in and build on them. Once that grading is complete at the development level, the developer's engineer submits an as-built grading survey of the whole development. Engineering reviews that for general conformance with the development grading plan, and assuming all the infrastructure is in the ground and ready to go, building permits are then allowed to be applied for on a lot-by-lot basis. What we're talking about tonight is not the development end of the process. We're talking about what happens once a building permit is applied for on an individual lot basis. So oftentimes that builder will be somebody different than the developer. That isn't always the case. Like in a Lennar neighborhood, Lennar is both the developer and the builder. But in Meadows, the one we were talking about, or Wasserman Lake, one of the many developments with the name Wasserman in it, Wasserman Lake Woods, that had a developer and then two different builders in it. So tonight we're focused in on these individual lots and the process that the city goes through associated with those. So under the city's current process, the builder submits a certificate of survey, which looks like this document with their building permit application. The certificate of survey will outline proposed elevations of the garage, the first floor, the lowest floor. It contains information about impervious surface. It provides information about whether the house is meeting the setback requirements, and then also the proposed grading of the lot. So what are the grades going to look like between the building and the street, for example, or the swales in the back yard. Right now, under the city's current process, when these surveys come in for review, the planning department reviews it for zoning things, setbacks and whatnot, hardcover. But the planning department also reviews those surveys for conformance with the development as-built grading plan. So that plan that I referenced that we get before we release building permits, the planning department will compare the individual plan with the development plan to make sure they match. If they do not match, then they'll ask engineering to step in and take a look at what they're proposing to do that's different than the development plan so that we can weigh in whether we think it's okay or not. Sometimes the building elevation will change. They'll raise the elevation a foot beyond what was in the original plan, so then engineering will take a look at how that fits in the big picture to make sure it isn't going to create any problems for anyone. Right now, the planning staff requires an as-built survey after the home is complete prior to certificate of occupancy on a case-by-case basis. So we aren't requiring it for all lots. Some areas where the former community development director was requiring them was like in Whispering Hills, where you have a multifamily, those villas which have much tighter lots and grading around it. He was requiring as-built surveys for all of those. And then sometimes they'll end up getting getting okayed for building permit prior to all the grading of the whole development being completely complete. We'll have like a draft as-built grading survey of the development, but all the grading won't quite be done, so he was requiring him there. But certainly wasn't requiring them for all lots. Prior to Ben and Aaron departing, the planning staff was reviewing the as-built surveys when they were submitted. But right now, we're currently transitioning to that review being conducted by the engineering staff. It is fairly technical in nature to take a look at what those grades are and determine whether they're okay or not. So we'll talk about that too a little bit more, but that's currently what's happening. In terms of actual inspection that happens on the lot, aside from building inspection, so making sure the building inspector gets out there and gets sure the house is built correctly. The only specific things that are being inspected in the field right now on a house-by-house basis are utility installation, and then Public Works will check the sidewalk condition to see if they've broken the sidewalk. That happens often. The builder will come in and build the lot, and then the sidewalk gets cracked, so we want to try to get that fixed before they follow up on things. We aren't currently doing, none of the departments, any specific inspection for lot grading, sod or driveway installation, or necessarily every individual tree that has to be planted on a lot-by-lot basis. We don't have that in our process currently. Did I miss anything, either of you on that? Okay, so then I do want to note that the city ordinance, as we talked about at a previous meeting, the city ordinance does require an as-built survey, so a certificate of grading be submitted on each individual lot after the grading's been complete. So our ordinance does require that. We just haven't been enforcing that requirement on every single lot. And in the time that I've been here, the dialogue that I've heard around that situation was an unwillingness to either collect the fees necessary to cover engineering, expanding our services and doing that work, or training or having somebody in the planning department or the building department take on that work. When you're talking about 200 lots a year, it can start to add up to a little pile of work.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Yep.
So Kara, I'd asked at the last meeting when the particular issue came up, I'd asked one of the two builders was here, asked what they understood certificate of grading to mean. This is the actual code language, I think, right?
Correct.
Matt and Kara. And I wasn't clear. I'm candidly not clear about certificate of grading, whether that means literally an as-built survey or it's some other thing. Kara, I think what you're saying is that you understand that to mean an as-built showing both the constructed house and the grading of the lot?
Correct. So essentially what they do is they take their certificate of survey that they had when they submitted the building permit, and they turn it into a certificate of grading to show what actually occurred on the lot with the construction. So they'll shoot the swales and the match points, the points there, the lot corners, to show that they actually graded it in accordance with this plan.
Okay.
Okay, and we're going to cover all three of these and then circle back to the resolution for some of them because they all kind of come together for us in a couple of different locations. But shifting gears now towards topsoil. So the city, the watershed district, the Carver County WMO, the MPCA, everybody under the sun requires 6 inches of topsoil to be placed on really any property that's graded. So even if we're doing a road project, we're supposed to have 6 inches of topsoil when we put things back together before we leave. The city of Victoria is split into 2 jurisdictions that are the local government unit for erosion control permitting and stormwater management permitting. One is the Carver County WMO, and the other is Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. Most of you are only used to hearing about Minnehaha Creek Watershed District because the vast majority of our existing city limits is in Minnehaha Creek. Within our current existing city limits, the only property that's been developed that is under Carver County WMO jurisdiction is Cheval.
That is incorrect.
That's been developed.
I was notified last year that I am now part of that district.
Correct, but we haven't gone through development. Your house was developed when it was still in Minnehaha Creek.
Thank you. Now I understand
Yes.
what you're saying.
So like the Vassar project, when that one comes in, that's not far from Councilmember Crowley's house, that actually will be in Carver County WMO jurisdiction because they realigned the boundary a year ago. As the city develops, the area south of Marsh Lake Road towards County Road 11 is Carver County WMO, but pretty much everything else is Minnehaha Creek. So the vast majority of our geographical area is Minnehaha Creek, which means it drains to Lake Minnetonka and ultimately Minnehaha Creek.
Where is that divide line roughly? Is it roughly down Deer Run at an angle over, or?
It really depends on where the storm sewer is running. So like in your neighborhood, the big ponds that are this pond, this wetland, and this pond all drain to Lake Bavaria. So that's all Carver County WMO because it's not draining north. Deer Run, all of this drains back north. Wasserman, everything that drains to Wasserman drains back north to Minnetonka.
Does Marsh Lake drain to Wasserman, or?
It
Pearson's?
splits.
Split.
Yeah. So in the case of Carver County WMO, from my perspective, they really have the topsoil game figured out a little bit further than any other entity I cross paths with. And part of that is because of our heavy clay soils in Carver County. Preserving that topsoil becomes so important. This council has heard me talk about the fact that we're, spending all this money watering our lawns. Well, when the lawn doesn't have topsoil and it's sitting over a bed of clay that's been compacted to death by graders during the development process, we have a lot more water running off the landscape than actually sinking into the ground. So that's part of what's causing people to want to just continually water their lawns. And that issue exists across Carver County. So Carver County WMO has been trying to work through this topsoil issue for as long as I've been around. And from our experience of interacting with them in Cheval, they seem to have a pretty good set of rules and processes in place for at least doing light years better in terms of preserving topsoil compared to what we're seeing in the rest of the city. In addition to the 6-inch topsoil requirement, they require decompaction of the top 18 inches of soil. So after the property all gets graded, the clay just gets compacted down and turns like it's a rock. So they require the soil to be decompacted so that water can start to infiltrate into that top section of it. They also have a good system for how they require the topsoil to be stored and be readily available for testing. But most importantly, they have staff that knows what they're looking at. They have the ability to sample and test the topsoil, and then they enforce that requirement as well. In the case of Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, which covers 178 square miles and 27 cities and 2 townships, it really is not feasible for Minnehaha Creek to test and enforce topsoil requirements on a parcel-by-parcel basis. It just wouldn't be practical or reasonable for them to run around reasonably testing all of these things. Right now, they are the LGU for our erosion control inspection on a site-by-site basis, and that staff doesn't feel that's been terribly effective. They can only get out here every so often. You got 2 people that are covering 178 square miles, so they just can't put the boots on the ground to really enforce that erosion control. So making sure that silt fences are up. If you've had an opportunity to drive through any development while the homes are being built, it sort of looks like a soil bomb went off, with mud being tracked every which place, because they just can't enforce that on a day-to-day basis like we could if we were enforcing those requirements. Tree clearing. I have nothing to say.
So currently Victoria has an ordinance that requires a permit to be removed for whenever a significant tree is removed on a private property. Again, we're talking about the individual properties that have been developed already. We're not talking about the mass clearing type of a development. There is no permit to remove any tree that's less than 8 inches, so people can remove those whenever they want to. A homeowner who removes a significant tree is required to replace those trees with there's a table in our zoning ordinance. The more they remove, the more they have to replace it, and it is a ratio, so it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, it's a smaller ratio. If a homeowner does not replace a tree within 12 months, there's nothing specific that penalizes the homeowner in our zoning ordinance. So what I was kind of assuming is that if they don't replace those trees within 12 months, that we could cite them with a misdemeanor.
The only thing I might add is I don't get involved in this issue at all because it has nothing to do with engineering unless the tree's growing into a sewer line, then I maybe care. But having worked here for as long as I have, I think the challenge here is I don't know if people know they need a permit to remove those trees, and then we don't hear about it until the trees are removed. So suddenly City Hall gets a call that a bunch of trees were removed after the fact. Would you concur with that, Ann? So that creates a challenge.
Right. Some of the challenging part of policing that is that you can't go on people's property. You can't really verify what was removed, what wasn't removed. And a lot of times these are done in the rear yards of people's properties, not in the front yards, so it makes it challenging.
Yeah, it's usually people that are on a lake that somebody on the other side of the lake will call us and complain. There's one particular resident who calls us the second he sees anything going on with tree removal, which is handy because then we can at least get out there and inform the property owner that you don't get to just cut down whatever trees you want on your property under our ordinance.
Mayor, if I care before you start again, if I could just acknowledge, Pat, you and I have had some communications. Pat and I, planning staff, have had some communications about this issue, and I don't want to pretend to give you the end of the story answer, but what we've been communicating about is that the legal authority, the statutory authority for cities to regulate the removal of trees in relation to new subdivisions, in relation to the platting of new lots, is reasonably clear. There's a statute that generally talks about city authority to have subdivision regulations, and in that statute there is a reference to having, providing for the preservation of growing things. I'm not using the term of art from the statute, but it's fairly clear that in relation to a new subdivision, cities can regulate the removal of vegetation as part of that subdivision. It's somewhat less clear the authority for cities to regulate the removal of trees from an individual's own lot. In other words, after the property's been subdivided, I've bought a lot, I've bought a house on a lot. Authority to regulate the removal of trees from that lot that I now own is less clear. So, and that's important because the examples you see in your staff report here, the examples from Shakopee, which happens to be a city we represent, and then Minnetonka, and then I checked around the office, and Maplewood, Minnetrista, Medina, Rosemont, a large number of cities we represent have tree preservation ordinances that deal with subdivisions. In other words, that say you developer, when you're subdividing, you're restricted, or you must get a permit, or there is some limitation on the removal of trees. But none of those cities have ordinances, at least to my knowledge from looking at it a little bit, that would regulate the removal of trees by a private landowner that owns an existing lot. So I don't want to give you the end of the story, but that's something that Pat and I have been talking about.
So related to all of these things, first I would say that staff does concur that these are issues. Every one of them have been things that in the time I've worked here have been talked about as the city's grown and gotten bigger, trying to figure out what the best way is to tackle some of these issues. I will say that related to this individual lot grading situation, historically it doesn't to me seem like it was the problem, as big of a problem before as it is today. And I think the reason for that is as we've shrunk the side yard setbacks, we're dealing with houses that are much closer together. So there's a lot less room to make up where issues happen. So I find myself more frequently getting asked to go look at drainage issues after the fact. I had shown the council some pictures of that retaining wall discussion. We're seeing a lot more retaining walls between lots as you're trying to fit all of this stuff into a smaller space and bigger house on a smaller lot. The interaction between these things becomes much more critical. And I think that going forward, we're going to only continue to see the issues that we're seeing repeat themselves throughout the process as we go forward. But from the issues that we identified, these are the different things that staff has been talking about and trying to figure out how we would recommend implementing them if the council chose to move forward with them. So certainly we could decide we don't want to be in the business of requiring as-built surveys, and we could revise the ordinance to not require that. That would be one option. We could develop specific criteria for when an as-built survey will be required. So instead of it being somebody just making a subjective decision when it would be required, we could try to come up with some specific criteria. Staff spent a fair amount of time talking about that and concluded that we don't recommend that. We couldn't come up with what would be a reasonably interpreted set of standards that would capture the issues that we're seeing. So this grading retaining wall issue was lots that had a certain amount of slope between the two of them, but often the problems I'm getting called out for after the fact are flat lots where it's a drainage issue because the grades are fairly flat between the lot. The side yard setback issue, well, generally most of our lots are R2, the ones that have been coming in lately, so most of them have that reduced side yard setback. So staff wasn't comfortable finding themselves being put in a subjective situation to make that decision about when they would be required or not. So alternatively then, we need to come up with a staffing process or fees to both require and review the as-built surveys for every lot. So we've spent some time looking into that, which we'll cover. We've talked about expanding the scope of site inspection for every lot. That relates to a couple of different things. One, it could be an opportunity to review grading in the field if you needed to. But it also would give us an opportunity to look at the topsoil, figure out how that's being handled, and then also this erosion control issue that we haven't covered in great detail, but we really aren't getting out and inspecting each individual lot for erosion control. And at the end of the day, when that erosion control isn't in, all that soil just ends up in the city stormwater ponds, and then we have to clean it out. So it's another way to be proactive in protecting those stormwater ponds by making sure the silt isn't ending up there in the first place during the construction process. We've also talked about replicating the Carver County WMO requirements to apply across the city. That one, figuring out how we would do that is probably going to take us a little bit more time to figure out what changes we would want to make, because that really needs to go back into our development process. So our plan requirements at the development phase. What our next step related to that bullet is we're going to have Carver County WMO staff meet with us and walk us through their process. We wondered if maybe they wouldn't be interested in at least helping us on the inspection side. Would we be able to get their help with that? Might be something to talk about with them. And then the last one that Bob touched on is revising the tree preservation ordinance and process. So that's another thing that we're tackling and looking at ideas for. Some things were a little further along and are a little bit more time sensitive. So in terms of the last two bullets, that is something that we'll keep working on and bring back to the city council when we get a little further along. But once we get through our presentation, if you have any feedback on those two topics, we're certainly interested in that. But in terms of addressing this as-built survey issue and lot grading and topsoil, in the interim basis topsoil, what we have here, what we put together is a table of how we're viewing that we could change some roles and responsibilities moving forward to address some of these things. And on the next slide, we'll talk about the implications of these changes. But specifically for the proposed grading, so reviewing of the certificate of survey when it comes in with the building permit. We've talked about transitioning that role from the planning staff to the engineering staff. And then these items in red, so actually going out, once the building permit is issued, but before they actually start building a home, going out on site to see that the required tree protection fence is in place so that we make sure that the builder isn't damaging the trees that are being preserved. Erosion control measures are in place, so that would be silt fence, bio rolls, inlet protection, whatever else we require as part of the building permit. So what we would propose to do there would be to have Public Works complete that inspection, and then also having Public Works involved in some fashion with topsoil once we figure out how that works. Engineering then would take on reviewing the as-built grading survey, but the community development department would be the gatekeeper of everything to make sure that everything's done before we would release an escrow. So I'm going to talk about those two things a little bit further. First, as it relates to Public Works, we are actually envisioning that this would be an individual who works currently in the Public Works department. He provides he does a lot of our stormwater requirements right now that were required under our MS4 permit. He's a certified erosion control inspector. We're required to have a certified erosion control inspector. He does the required MS4 inspections. So, and Ann certainly can speak more to this, but feels like that specific individual would be well qualified to move over to this role. So that we view as a specific person from the grading and as-built survey grading perspective as it relates to engineering. We'd be looking to have one of our younger engineers, a non-licensed, so they're called EITs, engineer in training, provide that review of the proposed grading in the as-built survey. They would have the technical background, but are billed at a much lower rate than, say, my rate, for example. And then the escrow release is this new piece. So what we're talking about, and I'm summarizing it slightly different here, is ordinance modification, some staffing, reorganization of duties, plus the public works staff. We have a +1 public works staff already in the budget for this year, so that's already in the budget. But then implementing some structural changes to fees in order to cover the cost of the expanded survey. So I do want to note that requiring the as-built survey would be a cost to the homeowner. The builder that was here 2 meetings ago or last meeting relating to the retaining wall estimated at an as-built survey to be about $500 a lot for them to put together. We didn't independently research that. I'm just repeating what he told us. But we would look at adding a grading as-built survey review fee to the building permit application. Looking at what some other cities charge, we came up with a range of $300 to $400 per lot. We would want to refine that number to reflect our actual costs. Right now, we have about 20 as-built surveys in the door that need to be reviewed. So my staff's going to review those shortly here so we can get an actual idea of how much time it takes to see if we can't get that number down. But the real piece of the puzzle is needing to have an escrow that's collected on a lot-by-lot basis to actually be sure that the as-built survey gets done. So right now, we have the ordinance written that we're supposed to have that as-built survey in before the final certificate of occupancy is issued, but they don't necessarily care if they never get their final certificate of occupancy. Once they get the temp CO and the homeowner moves in, and you probably haven't been here long enough to know how many we have backlogged, but
As-built surveys?
final COs.
And one of the issues is a lot of times these homes are completed over the wintertime, and you can't get the as-built surveys completed when the winter and the snow is in there, so we issue a temporary CO. And once they have a temporary CO, the initiative to get the actual as-built survey and the full CO goes down significantly.
So the escrow would be designed to address that?
Right.
To incent them to complete that. Now, I mean, that's a change, so we have to figure out what that right amount would be to have it matter for them to actually want to get the escrow back. But planning and finance would need to track that escrow, follow up, make sure that gets released, and we need to have process in place for all of that.
And so what I did is I surveyed 4 communities that are developing a lot: Lakeville, Maple Grove, Woodbury, and Chaska, to find out how these other communities are making sure all these site improvements are done. And Woodbury seems to be the most logical, and they're the ones who require a $4,000 escrow up front with every building permit. And that would cover the installment of a driveway, installment of landscaping, trees, the sod, and then the as-built survey. So those 4 main things. Again, they're difficult to complete in the wintertime, but again, that people want to move into their homes. So we're not tying up the people moving in their homes. We're just keeping that $4,000 from the builder so that they're done. They can get that stuff done in the spring or summertime, and we can issue that $4,000 back to them.
Are the fees taken from the escrow, or are the fees paid on top of the escrow?
The fees, the escrow would be on top of the building permit fees,
Okay.
correct?
So be additive.
Correct.
So I want to make sure I understand the as-built. We've got a number of different issues here, the soil, other things that aren't being inspected. So if we have to go out there and inspect anyways, is the as-built, I know there's an engineering review, but is that a separate inspection in comparison to the other items that are not being inspected? So would it require 2 inspections, or can one person do all of those?
I'll probably be able to answer that a little better after we get through the 20 that we have in the door. But I think, some large percentage of the time, the as-built survey should match the certificate of survey that was provided beforehand. You check the box, and I don't think you'd want to go out on site every time, because we have a right to assume that the surveyor who signed the as-built survey is being honest.
Right.
Where we've done a couple of them during the interim, and the engineer who's been working on it for me said there's a couple times where it'll come in and it just doesn't look right. And so he wants to be able to get out on site in order to just look to see what's really going on here compared to the survey. After we get through the 20 we have, I'll have a better idea of maybe how common that is. But, that may need to be an engineer, but we'd want to structure the fee, this as-built survey review fee, to really capture that.
Right, fair enough. The other, I want to make sure I understand the other point of this is the one example that we had where the grading was off by 3.5 feet is probably an outlier, but it clearly demonstrates that there's problems, especially with the smaller setbacks. So at the same time, I don't want to raise the prices of homes where it's not necessary. You're saying you don't recommend a subjective approach, but it seems to me that a lot of these places, we don't necessarily have to go through the time and effort. Is there anybody else that has guidelines they use as far as doing this so that we can try to minimize the amount of cost, or is it something that is it really an all or nothing? It seems to me there's got to be some sort of a happy middle ground.
In the examples, we didn't come up with anybody who was requiring it on a case-by-case basis. Most people are either requiring it or not requiring it, the as-built survey. But I do think it's important to figure out how to tackle that review as efficiently as possible. So that's why, looking to use a younger engineer because it's technical, but it's not super. You don't need me to review it. You don't need somebody with 20 years experience reviewing these things. So figuring out how we can do that efficiently to try to not even have it be as much as this $300 to $400 per lot that we were seeing with some of the other cities. Because like with our right-of-way permits, so the engineering department reviews the right-of-way permits. And so what we do annually is we look at how much we've billed the city for the right-of-way permits and how much we've collected. And then there's some staff time that gets estimated because they have to do field inspections on the right-of-way permits. We audit those fees annually to try to make sure so that we're just covering the city's cost.
Right.
You don't want the taxpayer subsidizing that review, but you certainly don't want to make money off the process. You just
Right.
want to cover your costs.
Break
When would
even.
that be due? The $300 to $400 per lot?
You've seen that typically charged with the building permit fee.
Correct.
With respect to the grading issue, are we more likely than not to have an issue where we have a different builder on each lot as opposed to one builder throughout? If Lennar's doing them all, it seems to me that they're going to be pretty careful and they're not going to have the same amount of issues in between each house.
I still get calls in those neighborhoods. It's just much easier for me to say, go talk to your builder. So they still have issues, but they just have to fight with each other themselves about it because the building department is different than the development arm. So then they'll be arguing back and forth, but it's easier to extract our role in it.
Explain the as-built survey again. Tell me exactly what an as-built survey is. I'm trying to understand how it's worth $500.
So the builder will go in and shoot the elevations of the house to confirm that the house was put at the right
Okay,
place.
so it's after the house is completed.
And the lot's graded. And then they'll shoot the lot corners to make sure that they actually finish the lot where it's supposed to be. Oftentimes where the problems come in is in that side yard two places. The side yard swale between two houses. So they won't, I'm fairly certain based on my review of this retaining wall issue that the first house didn't grade their lot properly. They should have had a retaining wall on their property back inside their property line. based on the different data points that I was able to pick up along the way. You, at an as-built survey, you would catch that because you would look at that elevation and see, oh, geez, this is 3 feet higher than what was on the approved plan. They didn't grade this correctly. Rear yard swales then is the other area. So we have lots of drainage that runs from one person's lot across the next person's lot, across the next person's lot. If that swale doesn't get graded correctly, then water starts pooling on the neighbor's properties.
Yeah, it seems to me the as-built survey detects the problem after it's happened. So the house is built, it was misgraded, and then you find out it's a problem. Isn't there some way of doing this before everything is finished?
Well, the good builders will check that pretty closely along the way.
Yeah, Mayor and council members, I think I hear, Mayor, you said, and then Councilmember Gregory, I think, and maybe you too, Councilor, isn't there a way to make the developer, in a development where the developer isn't also the builder or the primary builder, there's going to be separate builders that come in, isn't there a way for developer to make sure that builders have lots that are not unmatched grades? Isn't there a way to put the burden on the developer? In other words, to make sure that the ultimate buyers of lots in their development are not disappointed to find that their lot is not matched.
Which means the problem is solved up front instead of.
And I think to Councilmember Gregory's point, I mean, practically speaking, Kara is saying there may still be problems in a development where there's a single developer and a single builder. But as a legal matter, I mean, there isn't going to be any confusion about who's responsible, right, in that situation. If the homeowner next door has a low lot, there is only one party that's responsible. It's the developer/builder. There is only one developer, and that developer is the builder, and they're responsible for the grading of all the lots. So there isn't any confusion about who's legally responsible in that situation.
So I think back to manufacturing, we want to design in quality, we don't want to inspect it in after the fact. Isn't there a way that from a design standpoint, and I'm thinking almost in terms of an ordinance or a fine or something like that, that incents the developer to check that up front and make sure it's right and confirm it? Otherwise, it's going to be pretty painful if they don't check it and they get it wrong.
Instead of an as-built, some sort of punitive after the fact?
After the fact that okay, we're not going to require you to pay something up front, but you get this wrong, it's going to cost you.
Yeah, and Mayor and Council, I guess when I heard the series of questions about that, what it was jumping to mind for me is that the city's legal relationship to developer, of course, is a development agreement. In addition to all of our ordinances, et cetera, we have a development agreement that gives us the power to penalize, the power to have there be liquidated damages or other remedies under that development agreement. And I'm not personally familiar with the development agreement that puts the burden of builder grading on the developer. In other words, puts on the developer the burden to mete out unmatched grade issues between builders, but I don't know why theoretically that couldn't be done. I don't know why a development agreement between a city and a developer couldn't say, and developer, when you go and sell a lot to a builder, you are going to make sure that the adjoining builders have matched grades, and you can use whatever techniques you want to do that, but if you don't do that, we're going to have as a city the right to come in and make it right.
But isn't there a way to say, I mean, without having, let me start over. I understand your point about you will pursue matched grades and how that could be a challenge. But isn't there a way to state that as this is identified in the plan, the grade here, you're responsible for that, meeting that, and those grades better be right, and by implication, they have to meet.
Well, and I'm the wrong, you're going to have to turn the other direction. I think planning staff and the engineer are going to have a better sense for that. And I'll speak for them and then they'll correct me when I screw this up. But I mean, my sense is that in a city like this that has a lot of development happening and you want to be flexible in allowing there to be some variation in kinds of developments and products that developers are delivering, the grade is an important feature to allow there to be some flexibility between House A and House B next door. So, but yes, at the end of the day, the city has an interest in making sure that there not be what you saw here last meeting. I mean, that can't be a good consequence of allowing that variation between houses that are getting built.
So why don't we take a stab at it from a development agreement standpoint and take it to the existing people that are developing in town and see what they think.
Well, that would allow us to avoid having to add that fee in then too.
Right.
If we can get them to agree to it, maybe that's the win-win.
So regarding the fee, what staff is recommending is that the city engineer is reviewing all proposed surveys. And under that scenario, they would be charging $150 to do that work, so it's not coming out of the city's general fund. And that's the half of that $300. So the as-built surveys themselves, what we're talking about, is only an additional $150 on top of that fee.
Yeah, but that's, if it's 130 homes in a development, that's 40 grand overall. And you're cutting that in half, so that's another 20 grand they have to come up with. That's not an insignificant amount of money.
No. But the good thing about the as-built survey is that once the building is complete, the city can go and check and say, yes, that survey has been completed according to what the plans were. The issue 2 weeks ago was that there was a lot of finger pointing going on. The builder was pointing fingers at the homeowner, saying the builder was saying that he completed the survey as proposed plans, but it was the homeowner that messed it up with the swimming pool and everything else. If you had an as-built survey, the city would be able to verify, yes, at that point in time, it was completed, it met the plans. Anything after that, we know it's not the builder, we know who it is, it's the homeowner.
And that really, I'm glad you said that, because it really highlights the issue, because it's usually when the problem is there, and oftentimes it's drainage. The number one thing I'm getting called out on is drainage. There is no, why is this guy's water all in my yard? And oftentimes we have then pools coming in, big giant elaborate patios coming in, that then they regrade the lot. So even if you put a requirement on the developer, we have no way of knowing that anybody actually delivered on that requirement unless we require the as-built survey. That's the only way to physically verify that they delivered on the obligation at a point in time before the homeowner takes over, at which point it becomes the homeowner's problem. Or it's a civil dispute between two neighbors, which is how many drainage issues are that.
We're running short on time, so council, if you disagree with this, please say something. What I'd like to see is you guys, staff, wanted time to look at these issues a little bit more, do some of that checking. I would ask that we incorporate Councilmember Crowley's suggestion about looking in and as a possible solution here, adding something into the developer agreement to avoid adding those costs. And then once you've kind of had a chance to chew through that, come back again to the council. And very quickly, I did want to ask one question. Bob, when you were talking about we can't, once a homeowner or somebody owns property, we can't tell them what they can or cannot do with the trees. Okay, I understand that. As part of the shoreland ordinance that's there to protect the waterways, I don't know how that works in terms of, is that a right-of-way? Is that something that we can, in fact, control? Because the whole point of that is to stop the runoff and provide that buffering, which is really kind of the point of that clear cut, right? Is that something that we're allowed to do without infringing about a homeowner's rights or a property owner's rights?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, let me answer it this way. It is correct to say your assumption there, Mayor, is correct, which is that shoreland and particularly slopes along shoreland are governed differently than other properties in your city. In fact, you're required to have a shoreland ordinance that has some requirements, and the DNR is involved in reviewing city shoreland ordinances, and I know Pat is looking at that as well. And so the city's authority with respect to shoreland land is different than the city's authority with respect to other property that's not along shoreland.
So we can do something there and be fine. Yeah. All right. We have a few more minutes, Council.
Just a quick question on the topsoil, just out of curiosity. So 6 inches is required. I was curious, in undeveloped land, how much topsoil is typically there?
It's funny. had asked the same question.
About a half hour ago.
I don't remember the amount off the top of my head. What I understand from Carver County is that we have adequate topsoil in the county. It's about getting it stripped and protected. Too often it just gets mixed in and isn't great anymore.
And then with the decompaction, or whatever the term is, I forget what it's called, but are we enforcing that now, or is that in the ordinance, the 18 inches?
That is not in the city's requirements.
Is that something you're considering adding?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
good. And how, just briefly, the process, they just go in and dig out 1.5 feet and kind of respread it? Or
I don't actually know what Carver County WMO is seeing them do. What I've heard in other venues where I've been a part of those discussions is it's almost like they go in and till the soil up the same way as you might.
Garden tiller?
Yeah. Have you heard anything same?
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just thinking of something to avoid a lot of this. It seems to me that no one is inspecting as you go along, so that these problems develop because nobody was reviewing it earlier. So the instance that the mayor brought up where the house was built and there was a swimming pool and apparently some landscaping done, I mean, it had to be apparent at some point there was a problem with the lot next door months before this was ever brought up.
Actually,
It had to be very apparent that there was a problem. So isn't part of the problem that we don't have inspections, rather than charging all these fees, just have somebody, if there's a development, have somebody from the engineering or public works checking on how this is going compared to the grade and some of this stuff is so strange. You would think you'd notice it.
right, just to clarify, the house, if you're looking from the street, the house on the right, this drop-off wasn't noticed until the house on the right started to go in. That's when they had the house up, they came in and did the final grade. That's when they cut it to where it was supposed to be for the house on the right, and that's what created the big gap. Before that, it was still filled in, so it wasn't readily apparent till the house on the right was graded to the right point.
So if it was still filled in, what was the purpose of cutting and lowering the house in between?
The drainage from the uphill lot was flowing to the foundation of the downhill lot.
Right, so when that builder for the house on the right came in, looked at what it had to be the final grade, and actually cut that lot to make it the final grade, that's where that cut came from. And that's when it was readily apparent that the as-built for the house on the left, it hadn't been brought down to the level it was.
It's
So-
hard to tell during the development of each lot because the elevations of each lot are held down a couple feet so that when they excavate the foundation, they can lose the soil that they excavate on site and not to have to haul any off or haul any on. So the grades are all kept down lower than what their final condition is until the house goes in. So it's not readily apparent just by walking by. You'd have
Yeah,
to.
a manufacturing engineer would say this is a defective process.
Good point. One other thing that we should look at too is if we go back to that ordinance language, and Bob, you brought this up, the builder had said it too, where is it, certificate of grading? If that should actually read as-built survey to clarify, and that's a simple change, I would suggest that we do that right away if that's what the intent is. And then as far as overall on this ordinance and what we do, maybe we come back to it later. At least that way we can clarify that singular point.
From a timing perspective, when the city reviews its fee schedule in December, that would be a good idea to include, if we're going to include these fees, to include them as part of the fee ordinance update.
So do you think you guys will have time to finish the reviews and the other things we've spoken about to come back to the council so that we'd have time to put that on the fee schedule?
Yep,
if it's decided?
that's what we're shooting for.
All right, perfect. Council, any final comments, questions? All right, thank you very much. We're going to take just a couple of minutes here, and then we'll start the council meeting. I call to order the October 22nd, 2018 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, changes to the agenda. Council, Doug, staff?
None, Mr. Mayor.
Seeing none, I move we adopt the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Open forum. I have no slips. Is there anybody that would like to address the council? Okay, let's move on. Consent agenda. Anyone want to take anything off the consent agenda?
I would like to look at the pavilion rental agreement and fees, number I.
Number I. Okay, number I. Is there any other items? All right, let's approve the consent agenda, and then we'll immediately pick up item I. Therefore, I move that we approve the consent agenda other than the exception, or with the exception of item I. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is adopted. We'll take up item I. Councilmember Vogt, go ahead.
Okay, if we go to the agreement, the agreement that doesn't have page numbers, but the section on alcohol, which I believe is the second last page or third last page. Everyone, so if you go to under the alcohol section, item C, events with the sale of alcohol require a renter to hire a peace officer or security to be on site the entire time alcohol is sold. This can be through an independent contractor or the Carver County Sheriff's Department. My issue with this is if you don't go through the Sheriff's Department, what defines an independent contractor that is credible? So in other words, if I was renting and I found a guy who knew a couple of thugs and they came in vests, they were security for the party. This would be abiding by this ruling. That there needs to be more structure as to what an independent security contractor is.
Good catch.
Licensed by the state.
Licensed or something with credibility so that I'd be a good security person, just so I think that's the only flag I had is that needs to be tightened up.
Should we change it to say this can be done through Councilmember Vogt or the Carver County Sheriff's Department?
Yeah, I would appreciate those calls.
Also note, items A through F, or G, excuse me, there are two items A. That should be renumbered.
Yeah, second A should be B, typo. Deputy, I don't want, do we know, is there a definition of, as far as a license, what is it here?
Yep. Basically, when we were writing this, it would be from a contracted security firm, and maybe the sheriff has something to add. I don't know.
Deputy, I don't want to put you on the spot. Would you mind? For the record, please.
Stephen Glazer with a PH with the Carver County Sheriff's Office. The only thing I can think of, Councilmember Vogt, is if it says something like licensed and bonded. I'm not sure if that's typically a term used for other outside vendors, but that's a generic term in the private industry that we look at is licensed and bonded, because the licensing is one piece. The bonded also might have to, or not might, it has to do with insurance type. So it leads credence to them being a legitimate business. What I don't know is if there's a resource of, other than searching on the internet, if there's a resource of here's all the licensed and bonded security companies in the state. That I don't know of. And there is a difference between a security company and a private investigator. To become a private investigator in Minnesota is actually very, very difficult. Those are two separate things. They might provide the same services, but the bottom line is I personally would look at something licensed and bonded, and not or.
So while you were stating that, I found something that says for the state of Minnesota, Minnesota security guards are under the jurisdiction of the state of Minnesota Board of Private Detective and Protective Agent Services. Protective Agent Services encompasses a variety of businesses, including those that provide guards, security personnel, and armored car personnel. The professionals who run security businesses, either as proprietors or, in quotes, qualified representatives, must hold state licensing.
So it sounds like that's what we would want, right? Required state licensing, be licensed and bonded.
And
bonded.
in addition, yes, because that will have to do with an insurance piece.
Insurance covered.
The only, I guess not the only, the other part to that, though, is a private business can hire whomever they want as security staff for that private business or entity. And I know that's different here, but I just want to make clear. Those individuals don't have to have any licensing or anything like that. So that definition probably would be key in what you're looking for. But again, I don't know of any particular resource in the state that lists, here's all of the companies.
Mm-hmm. So a quick, thank you, Deputy. It sounds like the Councilmember Crowley and I agree. I think you agree.
I agree.
Councilmember Gregory?
Yes, sir.
So I think that's a consensus. Can we make those changes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then that needs to come back again to the council?
Or can we approve it with those
Oh,
changes?
yeah. You want to make the motion since you have the name of the...
And our ordinance will change, and it will end up reflecting that piece, so that piece can actually come back through the ordinance change.
Okay. So do we need to actually make the motion now, or just the direction is enough? When you bring the ordinance back, we'll fix
I
it?
think that direction is fine right now.
Okay,
Yes,
council?
and I'd like to apologize for not catching this at
At
the
the
Park and
Park and
Rec
Rec,
meeting
yeah. Okay.
a
Nope.
few days ago. So,
Okay, council, any other comments? Okay, next item is donations.
Make a motion, we approve a resolution accepting donations from the fire department open house, cash and check in the amount of $274, and then a private donation from Stephen and Mary Bennell for $1,200 for a park bench in memorial of Steve Bennell.
That's $1,200.
That was $1,200.
All right, so I think we've got that right. I'll second that motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thanks to each and every one of you. The next item, we've got a public hearing, 6A. Kara, if you would, please.
Evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we are holding the final assessment hearing for the 2018 Street and Drainage Improvement Project. The total estimated final project costs are $1.2 million. The final assessments per unit are shown in the right on the screen here. So for the Kelzer Pond area, consisting of Kelzer Pond Drive, Thrushwood Circle, Bayberry Circle, and Hawthorne Place, the final assessment amount is $5,800, reduced from $6,000. The Roy Street area, which included Roy Street, Grace Court, and Eretz Court, the final assessments are $2,800 for the single-family units and $933 for the multifamily units. Narcissus Street, the final assessment is $3,900, and Marigold Circle, also $3,900. The city's share of the project costs are $733,000. The estimated budget at the time of project award was $1.2 million. I will note we are $13,000 over budget.
Okay.
I'm not used to being $13,000 over budget, but we did end up doing some additional water system repairs on the project. We ended up replacing all of the valves. Once we got in and started to look at them, we decided to do so. Moving forward, I do want to say out loud for the public that we do not send a specific bill in the mail associated with final assessments. The property owners were notified of the final assessment hearing tonight. If the City Council adopts the assessment tonight, we will send another letter that describes what their options are for making payment, but it's not, they don't get an invoice. But the residents do have three options for paying the assessment. They could choose to pay it in full without interest. If they do so, it needs to be paid within 30 days of the assessment being adopted. So those dates would be noted in the letter if the council approves it tonight. They could pay in full with some interest. So payment in full made after, this date is not correct, after 30 days from tonight. So what is the date? October 22nd, so that'd be like November 23rd. Between November 23rd and December 31st, they could pay the amount of the assessment plus interest for that 1 month period if they wanted to pay it in full. Otherwise, it will be added to their property taxes for a period of 15 years with an interest rate of 4.91%.
Okay, before the council talks, we have to have a public hearing on this, correct?
Correct.
So I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there anybody that would like to speak? All right, seeing none, I move we close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is closed. Council, comments, questions?
Just care overall, how'd the project go? In general, were there a lot of complaints? What about, and then in addition, the number of sump pumps? I know that was always a question. Are we going to have some or many or?
Sure. Overall, I would generally say the project went well. I will note, though, and the council did receive emails from some property owners along the way. We had a more difficult time working with this contractor than we did with the past two contractors. And I've been hearing similar type comments from people around the industry. So I think maybe people got themselves spread a little bit too thin. We had a lot of rain early in the summer, so people were behind. So from a construction administration standpoint, this project was much more difficult. We had to have our staff be much more hands-on with the contractor and helping the residents navigate certain circumstances. We haven't actually issued final payment to the contractor yet because we're still resolving some outstanding issues. So I'm hoping that is resolved by next council meeting, but I've said that the last two council meetings as we've updated our internal council schedule. That being said, though, the end product is all looking good. The work's complete. Sump pump-wise, we were able to eliminate a number of them, so that did, while the overall project costs came in a little bit above budget, the reason why you're seeing a reduction in the assessment amounts was because we didn't have to put in as many sump pumps as we thought. Along the way was one area of some cost savings. So overall, though, we're finishing up our last of 18 years of street projects. So.
Got it. Council, comments, questions?
How many homeowners were involved here?
Oh, a couple hundred, maybe. I haven't counted this one in a while, but a lot.
Okay, I move we approve a resolution adopting the final assessment roll for the 2018 street and drainage improvements. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Kara. Next item, 7A, new business. Ann.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. At the mayor's request, he asked to have some information about the downtown snow removal process, and so I wanted to provide a little background and history on this one. The two maps that you're seeing this evening, so the one on the left, which is the sidewalk snow removal, those are areas in red are what the city currently does, and those in green are done by others, most notably the businesses that they front. On the right side is the downtown parking areas, and the three that the city does are in green. My apologies, 3 in red. The ones in green are done by others.
The red ones are public property.
Correct. As you know, no snow event is ever the same. So we kind of took an average of what what it looked like for a 6-inch snow event. And the equipment that we use, generally we use about 3 guys or personnel, 2 on bobcats and 1 on in a pickup to clear the parking lots and all the sidewalks downtown, and then 1 bobcat and 4 dump trucks to haul the snow out. Roughly about 9.5 hours it takes for a 6-inch event, from cleaning the sidewalks and all the parking lots and then hauling snow out. What we do is take the especially the snow with the on the sidewalks, we'll back drag that into the streets and then move all the snow to 3 to 4 different places strategically downtown. And we take all the snow within the downtown and put it into those spots. And then usually a day or 2 after the snow event, we'll start hauling out. I would like to note that all the businesses downtown really do assist with cleaning the walks and putting salt out for patrons. The big thing is when the snow hits and what time we're able to get down there. Generally, if it starts snowing during the day, the businesses really help keep the sidewalks clean. And we'll come in 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning once the snow event has been done to really start cleaning out the downtown. Within your packet also is our approved snow and ice control policy, which was actually approved back in 2005. And we're still using that today. Not much has changed as far as snow plowing and how we do it and what we do. So I wanted to include that in with the packet as well. So Mayor, I'm happy to turn it over to you and answer any questions related to the downtown snow removal.
Yeah, thanks. Ann, can you go back to the map of the sidewalks, please? That initial map, if you will. Thank you. I think I'd kind of like to understand in talking to other cities, they've all have told me that the businesses clear all of the sidewalks around their businesses, right? And the city cleans the city-owned lots, but it's the businesses to do the sidewalks. Seems Victoria is somewhat unique, and I'm trying to understand how we developed, if you will, differently, and how we kind of have a different approach, at least to a certain extent. And on the left here, the green is what, the privately owned sidewalks, the red is the city-owned sidewalks. Am I reading that right?
The red is the public sidewalks or the downtown sidewalks that the city does, and the green is what is done by the business owners.
The majority of the sidewalk, though, is located in public right-of-way.
Right. So we actually did some research several years ago. It has been quite some time, probably about 2012, and did a survey of other communities throughout the area. And a lot depends on how the downtowns are. Some places have a downtown and some really do not. But it was about 50-50 that 50% the city did the sidewalks downtown and 50% did not. So my guess, back in 2003 and 2009, the city and the businesses really made quite an investment in downtown. And my guess in that after the 2003 street improvements down in this area, which included sidewalks, landscape, all new streets, that the city really wanted to take care of the investment that they had made in the businesses to make sure that the downtown was done in a timely manner. It was cleaned well. You've got a lot of people that come to the downtown area. So back in 2005, I'm just taking a wild guess here because I was not here, that the city just decided that it would take on that responsibility to clean downtown, to protect its investment, and help create a walkable and livable downtown for people.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. I know in talking with some of the other mayors, they actually charge businesses to do that. We don't here, and we don't do anything either east or west of the core downtown, if you will, and we don't do anything south of Highway 5 for any of those businesses. So it's really just this center core area that you have on the map. Is that correct? All of the other businesses?
Yeah, actually along County Road 11, from Highway 5 south to 18, we also clear those sidewalks on
Oh,
both
because that's
sides.
close to downtown?
Yeah, and one of the problems you have, especially when you look at the MnDOT roads, county roads, they really throw the snow, and by the time that the homeowners and property owners can get to them, you've got a good foot of ice on those sidewalks. So we have also cleaned those just to make sure we've got a good connection through town and into downtown along Highway 11.
So we really have a mix here where we do some, I know in my neighborhood, I think the city does the main, if you will, the main pathway.
Pathways, yep.
But yet we don't do any of the sidewalks in front of residents' homes, right?
Generally speaking, yes.
Right. And here on County Road 11, you're doing the residents' homes, but there's, because of the county plows, it's difficult for those people to go in there because they're shoveling a couple of feet of snow off of the plows, right?
Correct.
And they'll never keep up.
And, yes,
Right,
and
so-
a lot of times they'll go through a couple different times, and so the first stuff they'll throw is the snow, and then a lot of times after the salt's been down, they throw in the slush, and then that freezes on top of the snow.
I've had to shovel that out of my driveway. I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
But I heard another point, a really important point that was kind of subtle, and that is the reason we're doing that south of 5 was to make sure it's walkable to downtown. We're not doing it as a favor to the residents.
No,
We're
I
doing
get
to
it.
maintain the ability to walk downtown.
Right. I'm just trying to understand that as this thing has developed over the years, how we're different than other cities, and I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm just trying to say it is different. I'm not sure that we need to make any changes, and I would in fact ask you, is there updates based on, if this was done, what did you say, 2007,
2005 was the policy was adopted by the council.
All right. From your perspective, is this something that we need to address since we've kind of got this mixed use? Is there something that maybe we should charge a minimal fee? Because I don't. You say the businesses do all the green, fine. How do we coordinate that with them? I think one time when you and I spoke about this, and this was probably a while back. I believe you had told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you told me it was just easier for the city just to do it all because it coordinates when we're trying to do the lots, so that we don't do the lot and the business comes out and pushes the snow back into the lot. We do it all at once and it gets rid of it more efficiently.
Yes, and the green areas are more recent. So the green along Quamaclit, along the flats, that was written into the developers agreement that they would be responsible for that snow. And
It hasn't snowed yet.
correct. Well, it did last year. Plus, it's a narrow area along that sidewalk. So, but the green, the Noterman building, the Main Street building, the clock tower, and the Lakeside building, he's got them in here pretty quickly to take care of the snow. He's actually beating us in here now, generally speaking.
So what I'm hearing you say is, okay, this is how it developed, and it was probably tied to how the city develops. We don't charge for it, but at this point, you wouldn't recommend any changes or updates to the policy?
One of the challenges is, I mean, if you were going to try, the nice thing about the businesses downtown here is that they really coordinate or try to work with us on every sort of maintenance activity that we do down here. But for individual, and this is just my opinion, but to try to have all the individual businesses take care of all their snow within the sidewalk and or parking areas, without some sort of coordination with the city, it'd be a real challenge because somebody might be out at 5 o'clock. Somebody might not decide to do it until 7. So what we end up doing is we put all the sidewalk snow into the street and push it into piles located throughout. So it'd have to be a really coordinated effort. The cost participation or a fee, that's something that I would certainly leave up to the council. That's certainly not my call on how the city would approach this.
Got it. Real quick, am I right in assuming then, like if we go down towards Enki, that's all private property? They do all of the sidewalks down there? Or I imagine we do the sidewalk along
There-
Stagger?
There's no sidewalk until.
Not-
Oh, that's right.
Not
There is
till
no
now,
sidewalk, is there?
yes.
There almost is. It's
Yes.
almost
That's the orange in the top right here?
Right. So that again, it's going to be an assumption because all the properties that are south, south of Steger Lake, sit up pretty high. I don't view them as being, the responsible party for that, especially, generally we go with if the place, a home has to front or side. If they're in the back, that's usually then the city's responsibility. But so I would envision this being also the city's responsibility.
So final question, the outside of this core here, with the growth of the city, is there other things that we need to look at the policy as far as all of the development that we need to make adjustments to, if you will bring it up to date for what we do outside of this downtown core?
Usually when we look at a new development that's coming in, we really try to look at where the trails are placed, where the sidewalks are placed. Does that trail make a significant connection to something more, not regional is not the right word, but
Neighborhood
a
connector?
neighborhood connection. We look at, we do all the schools. We try to make sure the school gets done and connections to the school, connections to the rec center, connections to large walking loop trails out by Holy Family, for example. So we look at those through the development process and make sure that the trail has to go to somewhere fairly significant before we will even plow it. So there's a lot of trails that we don't plow out in the system because they're just maybe a neighborhood connection and not a larger server trail.
Well, the city is responsible for around Victoria Elementary and Holy Family?
Portions of it, yes. Yep.
As a
The school does part of it too.
Okay.
As a priority basis, my assumption is first priority for the crews is the roads themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then these major trails, these major connection points is kind of the last item that gets hit.
And we're actually looking at making some of these trails a higher priority because there's a lot of people that use them. So we're looking at how we schedule and how we plan for snow removal on the trail. Some of the big trails, like 18 to the rec center, to the Lions Park, to downtown, we're looking at making those a priority on day one, just because the people use them so much. And if we wait, especially after a large snow event, we've got snowmobiles that are running on it, people that are walking on it, that they get packed down, so it becomes much more difficult for us to remove the snow on it. So we are looking at that currently.
All right. So with a couple of points noted, at this point, there may be some adjustments, minor adjustments to the policy, but at this point, you don't think there's any gaps or significant changes?
At this point, no. We've been, I think, doing pretty well through the entire process and planning and scheduling for plowing that I think
Perfect. Thank you. That's
I think we're
helpful.
doing okay.
Council?
Just to be clear, Floyd's parking lot, Victoria Borough, and the Victoria Flats, they all do their own?
Correct.
So is the sidewalk on Steger going from City Hall to the brewery, is that open at this point? Is that considered usable?
The pavers aren't in yet, so the pavers are scheduled to go in later this week. So it's technically still blocked off.
Yeah.
So the pavers are in.
Technically, we can get a huge
But you could walk
snowstorm
down
at any
it.
time.
Yeah. And the light poles are on back order, so those,
End of October, they're scheduled for delivery.
but the striping should be down any day.
Okay. Council, anything else? All right. Thank you, Ann. Next item, unfinished business 8A. Doug, this is yours.
Mr. Mayor, the council's talked a couple times, I think, about compost sites. First thing that happened recently was the county has notified everybody that they are going to no longer operate their compost site beginning next year. So the question is what the city of Victoria should do with our compost site, which with the county closing theirs, we'll probably receive more produce than we do now. And we have a very small site. The total site that we are able to use right now is 2,500 square feet. As the city of Victoria continues to get larger, that site is just going to be totally inadequate to handle the amount of material that may want to come there. So it's a staff's recommendation, and we look very carefully at this time of closing our compost site at this location. The location is just not big enough or accessible enough. If we keep using this and the city continues to get larger, we might end up having the kind of traffic jams that the county was putting up with at their site. So our recommendation this time is that we allow the private sector to assume the responsibility of taking care of the compost that now comes into our site. We open it twice a year, and we're currently spending about $25,000 a year to run that site, and I just don't think it's going to be an adequate site in the long run for the city, so it's probably better to close it down in the short run. We're not aware of any other site that the city now owns that would be also workable with this. One suggestion might be the new Public Works building property, but as we see that still would have some problems, would require some quite extensive work and investment in that property to do it, and with potential and probability of closing down your current old Public Works site and building more on the new Public Works site, we don't think that site is adequate enough in the long run to handle a compost. So staff recommendation is that we, council, consider notifying the public that we will no longer operate a compost site. As you know, Mr. Mayor, we've advertised the discussion for quite some time, and in your package, we have quite a few comments from residents that have responded that they do use this site and would not like us to close it. Staff would also point out that we think there are a number of commercial outfits that actually put some of their materials in here too, in addition to residents. The other problem with our site is we have no control on access, and if this council would decide to keep this site for a few more years, we would suggest you spend some money and make it so that we can cut it off certain times of the year, certain times of the day, maybe go to a 3-day-a-week operation for some number of months or something. But the current situation, we think, is not a long-run solution.
Just a wild thought. I don't know if this would tear up the parking lot, but given that we have a lot of that parking at the rec center, the back parking lot, would it be possible to do a temporary solution if we close down the old Public Works site where we had those roll-on or roll-offs? I don't know what they use to collect that stuff.
No, I've seen cities do that. We could use a large parking lot like that, maybe 2 days a year or something, and say, okay, on Saturday, bring everything you got. We'll have roll-offs, garbage trucks there to protect it, and I think there's a potential for that.
Create 500 feet of road on 13 and a half acres. We got 13 and a half acres sitting there doing nothing. Nobody's there.
They just put in a gravel road?
Just a brief one.
Mr. Mayor, Pat has assured me that there will be building going on that 13 and a half acres as we
Tomorrow?
speak here. I'm not sure about tomorrow, but
No, Wednesday.
I'm just saying, it doesn't have to be a permanent solution, but
No,
it would
I
work
agree.
temporarily. Yes, there might be, you're looking for places to put dumpsters, but what I heard, what I heard out of Mr. Reeder's comments were more about the security and safety of the site and oversight, and we don't have an ability to do that. And that represents a legal risk from my standpoint. I've made use of this. It was very convenient after a storm. That being said, if this wasn't here, I'd have had to drive down the road, and I would have done that. Convenience is wonderful, but the city can't take on additional risk to maintain it.
Mr. Mayor, in storm situations, I think we could always come up with temporary solutions, as all cities I've worked in have. And we'll pick it up, we'll say, okay, bring it here. So I think we can handle storm situations, but just a continual bringing of the grass clippings and the leaves, I think, the private sector does quite a bit of that. All the garbage haulers, my understanding, do that kind of work, and you have to pay for it, but I think there are some alternatives available that do work.
So I'd like to ask the staff consider the rec center, or if we did something on 13.5, that may just get in the way if development comes in. But yet at the rec center, if they're just roll on, roll off, as long as it's not tearing up the parking lot and creating a lot of damage and maintenance work, I don't know, I would defer to staff to say, is that a problem?
And one of the things that we'll have to be very careful about, we do have fall soccer leagues, and
does that lot get filled up then?
Yes, that utilizes that nights and weekends. So that in itself could be challenged, and then we move right into hockey season about this time of year. That's an overflow lot for hockey as well. So. And that site was not, the parking lot was not built to city standards. Could it handle a couple-day event in the fall and spring? I think it could.
Well, for that matter, I mean, if we're gonna have a site and do it right, it should be at the Public Works facility. And we have 10 acres. But that interrupts Public Works vehicles coming in and out in the way it's currently designed.
And I think you'd have to be. I think that you'd have to be careful, especially because of the access off of Bavaria. It's a very busy road.
Plus, that facility is going to be expanded in the coming
At some
years.
point. Yep.
So you can't have traffic like that coming through where you've got.
Not during the hours of
working hours.
operation.
So we could say officially it's closed, but in the event of storm emergencies, I can't say that, we could have a temporary facility.
Absolutely.
And I think the old Public Works building could handle something like that. We can certainly bring dumpsters in there still and deal with storm events, large storm events.
Yep.
There was a question that came up, kind of related to this, and it was a planning session or something several years ago, and we never had a chance to really pursue it, but there was a question that came up. Would the city be interested, the citizens be interested in the city providing a leaf pickup service or something like that? Just being able to, all right, bring them to the driveway and drive around and pick them up, as opposed to having the facility down here. And I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I know it's an alternative idea.
It's one that will cost a significant amount of money to do that. Yeah.
More than the 25,000 we're spending now?
Yes, I mean, you're looking at new equipment. A number of staff would be required to haul leaves. Where do you take them? Do we drive? Yeah. So, it could be quite the expensive venture.
All right, so
I like the idea of maybe a couple-day event at maybe the rec center where we just monitor it for 2 days here or there, whatever. I think that's a good idea. I think it's a good approach, and that way we can keep tabs on it rather than have it open for 4, 5, 6 weeks at a time. I think that's problematic. With respect to the old Public Works, I'd like to get that place closed down and somewhat cleaned up, and give it some thought process about repurposing that. Possible a trailhead or some sort, and that could accommodate a number of the people that are parking downtown with their bikes and then unloading them on the trail. That could be a good site for something like that. I know you have plans for a new cold storage shed at Public Works.
There is a future plan for a cold storage shed. Right now, we use that facility as cold storage, and it is
The existing one.
the existing one, old Public Works. And it's full of equipment that we utilize it for cold storage.
And what are the remediation requirements for that site if it was even in the event of a parking lot?
And I know that the city had done a phase 1 environmental study on it, and it'd likely need a second one. to determine what is on site. It used to be an old garbage dump. We find a lot of tires and miscellaneous items that, will end up popping up over time, the frost and thaw. We do not have a legal access off of Steger Lake to the Public Works site as we cross the Hennepin Regional Rail Authority Trail. And that is something that they have been somewhat concerned about. And I know that in speaking with them, they're not quite as concerned at being the city utilizing it, but for other purposes, they have concerns about that and likely would not give us a legal crossing unless it was city-owned property and utilized as city functions.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I've heard different things on this. The city owns the Public Works site. That's our land, right?
Correct.
This is the parcel in blue that we own.
Got
We
it.
don't own in between the two blue boxes.
Right, that's the regional trail. But, Bob, it's my understanding that they could not, since we own that land, they could not take access away to our land. And that's how the law is. Now, I don't know if it's different if it's cities or if that's an accurate statement. Do you know that if for example, if we tried to do something else, or there was some discussions, Rick Leitner wanted to move his property there, not saying that we're going to do that. Councilmember Gregory, I mentioned too about potentially parking for a trailhead. So, I mean, I don't know if these options are on the table, but this question keeps coming up about access. Do you have any information on
My
that?
understanding previously was that if we change the use of this facility, the Carver Park Reserve could eliminate our ability to access. And so,
Right, and I didn't think they could do that. So, do you know?
Well, I think the statement that the city doesn't have legal access to that property refers back to when it was actually a rail right-of-way. And I think that the county would have taken it subject to whatever rights were taken when it became rail right-of-way, which is a lawyer way of saying I take it that the statement that the city doesn't have a legal access is a correct statement. I think there's ways to acquire that access, but if we don't have it now, we don't have it now. So
Right.
I think the answer is yes, they can block access if we don't have some legal interest that allows us to have that access. I mean, this is not the only theoretical access to that property, and so I think that's the answer. I'd need to do more title work to give you a definitive answer, but that's my understanding.
I'd like to, I'm not doubting what you said. I was told that when you own a piece of property, property owners around you can't stop you from going to your property, i.e. legal access. Now, I have no idea because of the nature of the history of this, whether that's true. Mm-hmm. But the properties that surround that, is that all Carver Park Preserve to the west there in the north?
Correct.
So part of this,
Carver Park Reserve.
regardless of whether they could or could not, it doesn't mean that we couldn't talk to them and negotiate some sort of an agreement should we want to repurpose that and we get their concurrence or their buy-in.
No,
we would
and
still be
Mayor,
able
to
to
be
do it.
clear, I don't know the nature of the county's legal interest in that trail. But that said, I'm guessing, Kara, tell me if I'm right or wrong, the access further to the northeast, there is an access there. There's a road there, right, that crosses the trail?
But again, doesn't have a right of way or any sort of legal access. So Carver Park Reserve is likely in the same boat we are with their driveway back to their
Boat launch.
Yeah. So, but Mayor, to your point, I mean, is the landowner entitled to get access somehow? Generally, the principle that you're stating is correct. I guess what I'm saying is that the existing access, which you can see on this aerial, the city has no entitlement to that particular way of getting to that piece of property, as I understand it. Is the city entitled to get to the property? Somehow, yes, but that's something that has to be worked out with the rail authority or with the now park authority.
I think that's something we should get.
We should get an answer to.
We keep kicking this around, well, we don't know if we have access. Well, let's get access to it.
Yeah, we need a proactive approach on this instead of arguing about it every 6 months.
Yeah.
What's the timing for the cold storage at the Public Works facility, where this could be considered shut down?
I do not believe that it is in the 5-year budget,
Okay.
or the 5-year CIP.
So it's in the
It
5-year?
is not in the 5-year CIP.
Now, why wouldn't it be? Why would we
Because we have
assume
this
that we're
facility?
going to keep, well, this is, but I mean, that's back to our psychology here, which is screwed up, that we are doing nothing. This thing is basically in the downtown area. So I think it should be dead as a compost site, but we should also, on the other hand, start figuring out what we're going to do with it.
At least start the discussions.
Yeah, in other words, parking would be a good one, but we should find out, what soil remediation issues are there, for sure, what the access issue is, for sure. And definitely I believe that compost site can't be there for about 50 reasons. One of them is this is in the downtown area. You want people forever coming from all over Victoria to haul stuff down Steger Lane into that area? No. And, so we should start making plans. The fact that that cold storage building hasn't gotten into any planning that's a little disturbing. I think that would have assumed that we're doing nothing for 5 or 10 years.
I do recall another conversation about this, and I don't remember the context of it or why it came up, but there was some discussion about, all right, what possible use could that ground be? And due to the potential remediation issues, it would be cost prohibitive, and that the best use of that land might be donate it back to Carver Park Reserve in exchange for them cleaning it up.
Oh, I think I remember something along those lines. Ann, do we know, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do we know what it would cost? Do we have any estimates on what it costs to clean that up?
I do not.
Depends on what's in it.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, it's cheaper just to leave it and cover it and cap, and I think sometimes that's exactly what they're.
If you use it for parking, you should be able to cap it with a couple feet of soil.
So, unless the council disagrees, sounds like there's a consensus to let's figure out the access issue. And then I think maybe the other thing that goes along with that is let's start soliciting ideas, not only from staff and council, but also from the residents and any business owners that have thoughts on what we could potentially do, and maybe come up with a short list of various options that we can look at and start maybe digging into detail, assuming the council wants to do that.
So, Mr. Mayor, are you ready to say that we're not going to open the site in next year?
I think that's what I heard the council say.
Say,
Yeah.
Yes, is that? Yeah, we're going to close down the waste collections.
Okay, why don't you give me a motion on that, and we'll notify the public.
Do we have one here?
No.
So what is it, as of 1 January 19?
Directing staff to close the compost site effective
January 19.
January of
2019.
2019.
Right. So I move we close the old Public Works compost site effective 1 January 2019. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
With respect to the potential uses for that site, can I offer that it might be to our benefit to make the first conversation be with the Park Reserve?
Yeah,
Just to see what their thoughts are.
I don't have any objection, Council.
Given that they're all around it, I think it would be a courtesy to speak with them first.
Right, and they may come up with some, maybe they'll trade us 20 acres for it.
very good. I would agree with that, but then also with respect to the compost, give it some thought. Are we going to have a seasonal pickup?
Let us look at,
Okay.
come back with some ideas on that.
Okay, we'll direct staff to.
Seasonal or emergency or something like that.
Yeah. So Doug, you'll look at that and come up with some options, bring them back to the council?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Council, any other items, questions on the compost? Okay, thank you. Pat, next one, 8B.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council.
Oh, by the way, thank you, Ann.
August of this year, Thanks. The city council appointed a 10-member task force to look at the downtown parking. The council also hired Hoysen and Kogler, HKGI, to assist with the task force at a cost not to exceed $11,980. The Carver County Community Development Agency has a redevelopment planning grant available to undertake planning initiatives as part of a redevelopment project. Staff applied for the grant and is awarded $5,990 to cover half the cost to completing the downtown parking task force study. The next step to receive that money is for the city council to approve the planning grant agreement, which was included in your packet. That would cover the cost, half the cost of the completing the downtown parking study. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Pat. Council?
Just thanks for whoever came up with this to get the money. That's
Good
great.
work. I move we approve the Carver County CDA planning grant agreement that awards the city $5,990, which would cover half the cost to complete the downtown parking study. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Pat. Next item, reports. Doug?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say I'm happy to be back in Minnesota. We were on the East Coast, and it was just hotter than heck. And I don't usually like the cold that much, but it was nice to be back here where it's a little cooler. And secondly, I'd like to
say
thank
that in 2
Kelly
months.
publicly for filling in for me. I think she did a great job and kept me informed what was going on, and so I appreciate that, as well as the rest of the staff. Finally, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to talk a little bit about the election. As you may know, we have one coming up. This year, the results of the election are going to be a little bit more difficult as it was in the primary because of the absentee ballots will not be counted here. So what we'll be able to provide anybody is the results of each precinct. We will be able to give the numbers that are available in precincts, but without the absentee number. So it won't be until we see it on the state website, and that's where people should go to look, that you'll actually get the final number. Now, in the primary election, Carver County was the first county to get all their numbers together and out in the public, including the absentees. So I think Carver County will do a good job getting them out there, but I just want public to know that they won't be immediately available because the absentee ballots do not come here to be counted. They're counted by the county, and so no results, final results will be available right away. But they will be available on the state website. And then the city council will actually canvass the election at the November 13th meeting after the election. So,
If it's not already on the city website, could we put something out there for residents? It kind of give them the link where to go?
sure.
All right. Is it all?
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Bob.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Crowley?
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Vogt?
I have one thing to report. The Friends of the Victoria Library had a meeting the other night, a board meeting, and one of the things that came out of it, and I've told them I would bring this up, is they believe they need to get some signage. Most cities have signs that say library with an arrow pointing to it, and they will be approaching the city manager and possibly Pat or Ann to request that at least 4 signs be erected in this area, in the downtown area, pointing people to the library. They have some funds that would be available to help with this initiative without knowing how much it costs, but they're willing to pitch in some money.
Do you know where those locations are?
I think they're talking about them, but I don't personally know them.
The reason I bring it up is because the need to put a sign in happened at least one other time in the last 8 years, and it was a real challenge. And that sign was to put in on 212 at Engler, Victoria this way, and it had to go all the way to state for approval and lobbying by the mayor, and it was a significant effort.
They're talking about the downtown area.
I understand. So, but if we're going to put a sign on state jurisdiction, we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Where's the state jurisdiction?
State Highway 5.
Yeah, so you stay off of 5.
Well, that's where you want it, to point right downtown.
The problem is people come into this is the same with our parking, by the way. People come down Victoria
Yeah.
Drive off the highway. There's no signs pointing to any parking lot.
Well, we can do that, but we need one on 5.
Well,
Mr. Mayor, Pat, do you want to talk about what we're doing on signage right now?
Right. So this is a timely question because you should have them direct them to me because staff is putting together a map of parking signs, directing people to the parking lots. But we are also considering adding signs like for the library and for the city hall. And so
Yes.
we're going to try to come up with a plan and then get quotes from a sign company to find out how much it would cost to pay for that.
Patrick Smith will be the name I use.
But if there is a way to get one on 5 pointing right downtown, that would be a good thing too, even though there is a challenge.
Okay, anything else? Councilmember Gregory?
No, on no report.
I have no reports. I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
7:30.
Ooh. I don't think I can go home.
7:30?